make our way home through, so let's get on there. Receive apologies from Marcus Skeet, who is quite seriously ill at the moment, Colin Carl, Emma and Dave Ward. You all know Dave Ward's been having a difficult time. Right, any declaration of pecuniary interest? No. Minutes of the last meeting, is everyone agreed on them? Any matters arising from them? Thank you. I'm just wondering if everyone is quite happy if I change the agenda a bit. Natasha's here to present her Children's Mental Health Task Group, which is number 7. Is everyone happy if I put it before number 4? So she can then go, Mr. Christine. That's right. Right, over to you. Who's here for that? Oh yeah, yeah. So the troubled families, which is on the supplementary second bit. So sorry, would you like the troubled families and then? Is that all right? Okay, and then item 6 straight after Natasha's. Is that all right? Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you. Right, Natasha.
Thanks very much for having me. So, again, forgive me, I've never really presented one of these to a panel before, so just cut me off if I'm waffling on. Just to introduce the report, I assume everyone's had a chance to read it. Last year, the panel decided to look at children's mental health in Merton, and as part of the task group, we initially started looking at postnatal attachment and the prenatal care area, but we realised that Merton already had quite a good offer around that, and that actually the issue came when people went into secondary school and or primary school, and there was no real clear pathway to getting help. So we've made recommendations around that kind of primary school and up age group. We've received representations from Hearts and Mind, which is a wonderful local charity, which gave us some really great evidence about what it's like to have mental health issues with a young person in Merton. We spoke to the Youth Parliament, who made me feel very depressed about the world, not because it made me feel old, but because the pressure they're under as young people to perform and to succeed, and the fear of failure at such a young age is just quite terrifying. So it really hammered home that we have an opportunity to provide our young people a space for them to offload some of that pressure and find a way through that transition from being a young person to an adult, which is getting harder and harder the more time goes on. So we've made some recommendations around these areas. Do you want me to go through them, or should we just pick out a couple? Should I go through the recommendations, or should I just...
We've all read them.
Okay.
So I think, I thought there were a lot, but when I looked at them, they're all important. Some can be acted on so quickly, so I think they were very important to mention, so I thought that was really good. So do you want to just see if anyone's got a comment on any of the recommendations? The recommendations...
It's on page 15.
Has anyone got any comments on them?
I've got a comment. I just want to say something.
Joe?
Right, okay. Thanks, Natasha, very much. On page 3, fund received, notice you said fund received was £571,000. And can you just...
the recommendations on page 15.
Oh no, is this the audio report?
No, just page 15. Go from page 15.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So, I'll give you time. Give you time, Joe, to think. Agatha?
I don't really want to ask any questions because I was on the task group. I would just like to thank Natasha for actually coming to present this, because it's not easy.
Thank you. James?
Chair, thank you. So I read this. It seems a really excellent report, really good piece of work. I was only going to make the observation that previously, when I've been involved in task groups, the implementation is also equally tough. And I just wonder whether there are any plans to have a a champion for this, because in the past that seems to work quite well, to have somebody who has ongoing liaison with officers and is able to continue to push to encourage as much of it to be implemented as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. Natasha, that's a very good suggestion. Not suggesting you take it on, but would it be possible to, with the task group, see if that's relevant
Yeah, I think
to
that's
a wider group?
I think that's a wonderful idea. I'll email the other members of the task group to see if any are willing to take that on and do that. It's a really good idea.
Any other points? Right. Apart from the recommendations, has anyone got anything they want to ask about or clarify?
I suppose a help clarification is for everyone on the table would be what happens next. So when we receive a decision panel task group output, then there's response made on this recommendation to take forward so that everyone understands. And my thought is in fact there's some advice in the through. So if we can clarify what we say to the next step after it's in here. Is still a
Yes, send us the screen up.
who's the point of contact for implementation? Is it working with public health? I know you still mentioned there was an
So there's the CTG, and then there was youth inclusion within the council as well. So there was the recommendations go across the department. So I don't know if it's better to have one person to bring that all together.
Yeah, Stella will liaise with the relevant people, and usually an action plan is drawn up, and then that action plan will continue to come to scrutiny every 6 months to see how we're faring against the recommendation.
Yes, that's one thing I'd like to say. If it came back to us just very briefly in about 6 months' time to see what progress is being made with your recommendations, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for Natasha? Well, Natasha said she'd look into that. It is a good recommendation, and Natasha will get in touch with the group and see. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, just for the minutes and stuff, thanks so much to every member of the task group who participated and contributed so much of their time and took so much interest in this, and I think we worked really well together and we had a great time doing it. So.
On behalf of the committee, can I thank you very much for it. I know you're passionate about this area, and I found it a very interesting read, and I do hope, especially the emphasis you put on governing bodies to become involved, is followed through, because that is important. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right, if we move on to item 6 being brought forward, the issue on troubled families, and you've got your report, and that one is in the separate public. Roberta, we have read it, and I found it extremely interesting. Thank you very much. And it's upsetting how funds are being reduced, but if you can explain, taking it that we've read it, explain any developments since then and particular points of emphasis. Thank you.
Do you want me to take this on?
Yes,
Okay, so firstly, apologies, I realised that the attachments, the appendices that I put at the bottom of the report didn't go into the report. So if they are desired, I can have those sent out. Yes, okay, so well, in summary, it is still, as I've described in here, the Troubled Families Program was a 5-year, this phase was a 5-year program due to end March 2020, and we've had news through the National Spending Review that there is an extension, but we don't know how much that is or what the expectations are for that. That's still with ministers. I've not had any updates on that. And so we were still facing an overspend for this year's funding income because that's reduced. The first 3 years we were getting an average of sort of 571,000 per annum, and then in the fourth year that reduced because of the attachment fees reducing, and then this year it reduced even further. So we really don't know what the funding situation will be for the following year, if it's going to be, we really don't know. It could be a lump sum to make sure that local authorities are finishing with the maturity model. There's an expectation that every local authority develops a really help pathway and has a sort of mature status. It could be to support the final payments by results. Or it could be a mix. So where we're at the moment is we're still within the reorganisation, which was the option that we decided, option 2, that D&T went for, and we're due to have the response to staff on the 7th of November, but we're very much still in the middle of that.
Anything else? Thank you. No, I agreed with option 2 being the best option. So there's James.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry? Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. Thank you very much for the report. I found it a little challenging because, and I know there's a huge amount of work's gone into what you do, but also into this report. And I just felt it would have been helpful to understand a little bit more. It talks about the raw data, the figures,
Yes.
but I found it quite helpful to understand a little bit behind the figures, why some of the numbers are as they are, what you're doing, the team that you're part of are doing with the families who haven't yet achieved what we want to achieve, and we know that happens. There's nothing wrong with that. But so I'm not worried about that. But it would have been good to understand the process rather than just the financial data, to understand what process you're following to bring more families over the line. However, having said that, I do appreciate it's primarily a financial report. It would have been helpful to have a sort of summary at the beginning as to what we might have done to contribute. But it seems it comes down to the 3 recommendations, and I'm sure you have picked the right one, but there's absolutely no context as to why or how or the thinking behind it. So I definitely don't want to be sound negative, because that's not my intention, but I just found the report quite challenging as to what to make of it.
That's the appendices, which I realised weren't attached. So there was one that had a more extensive data summary within it around the number of referrals, where they came from. That's into the direct team. And then there's another attachment that has the case studies. So there's 13 cases that provides an outline of the type of work that was being presented to the team that did have positive outcomes, but not to the extent that could be claimed. And one of the most difficult is usually education outcomes, because the requirement is quite a sustained period of attendance and at a very high level. And for some families, the children are struggling even to get to school, let alone to maintain their attendance. So they give a lot more of the context around the type of work that was being undertaken and some of the struggles in meeting the full claim. I could also send out what the outcome plan is, and that outlines in more detail around what, as a borough, we would be wanting to achieve for families, and how we would measure that. And those are the criteria in which we make a claim, and that could be in any team if they're working with a family.
if with the chair's permission, if you could circulate that, I would find it helpful. We only meet a few times a year, and the chair. Oh, I've been cut off. It's probably by the chair. We only meet a few times a year, and it's just the only thing that's slightly disappointing is your work's so important, but it hasn't really, not enough information has come through here to be able to make any meaningful contribution. And I don't know whether somebody can just give a little bit of comment as to why, I'm sure number 2 is the right one, but why number 2 was selected and the process to reach that decision as well.
I'll comment on that because the decision was one for the Directorate Management team. So we had 3 options in front of us, one of which was straightforwardly to say that with the loss of the Troubled Families Grant, we should lose the posts that were funded by it, and that would have led to rate redundancies. The other 2 options were ways of trying to mitigate the number of possible redundancies and to find ways of continuing as much of the work as we could in the light of the disappearance of the grant. And one of the things that helps to sustain this work is if it is more embedded throughout our services rather than a single standalone team that stands or falls on the continuity of the grant. Lots of other local authority models now work on that basis, where the work is distributed across the early health and prevention services and the claims are made from any part of those services. And we had already found that we were making claims based on work that was done beyond this team. So in other words, there were already staff in other services that were contributing to payment by results outcomes. So when we looked at options 1 and options 2, option 1 would have involved effectively the decommissioning of some work that's contracted outside this council and rerouting those funds in order to sustain the team more or less in the current kind of model. But the second option provided greater resilience going forward because it embedded the work across the service and built on the work that we were already doing to enable payment by results claims from other parts of the service. So it's a more robust, more resilient way of undertaking the work, and even if the grant is extended and we receive more funds, the funds that have been we've been told about but haven't kind of been fully confirmed for us yet, we wouldn't return to this particular model because it's so very vulnerable, really. We'd much rather have distributed the work and made payment by results claims based on all the work distributed across the service. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Sorry, Hayley, then you.
Okay, Roberta, are you okay? In terms of the next steps, you mentioned in 2.32 that the response and final structure would be due to be confirmed on the 7th of November, depending on consultation feedback. I just want to see whether or not we will actually see that final review.
So yes, I'll leave it with.
Can we have an action that we do actually see that? Is that okay? Right. Because that's actually the day after our next meeting as well. So we just have that minute together. So thank you.
Jennifer?
Yeah, just asking about whether when you hear David, when you final funding, when is it going to be
Sorry, I'm just asking whether you know when the date will be to the funding may come through. No idea at all.
So we've been told that there is funding. It's in the spending review. There was a line to say that there's 1 year more. And we've had a letter from the Troubled Families team in central government, and it just says that they're waiting for ministers to decide how that will be expected to be spent. So we don't even have a date of when that will come through to us. I'm quite busy at the moment, so we don't know when that will be.
Thank you. Emma?
Thank you for the report. On 2.33, where it mentions the remaining staff moving over to the new family wellbeing service, do we know how many of them are moving over, or we won't know that yet?
So that's all part of the final restructure decision as far as how many posts and what grades. That hasn't been landed yet. we're hopeful that as many staff as possible will avoid as many redundancies as possible, but that's not been decided yet. It's still in the hands of the assistant directors around what the final structure will look like. We've got a lot of feedback in the consultation process, and we've got 2 alternative proposals given to us. So with the proposal we put forward and the 2 alternatives, there's a lot to consider, and there's been some really helpful feedback as well around what to consider in that new service, because it's bringing together 3 teams plus another service from the education department.
Thank you.
Thank you for the report. This isn't a question to do with the report necessarily, it's to do with the performance indicators on page 30. 37 is to number of families engaged for every programme. What's the every programme? I thought I'd ask the question while you're here now.
Yes, yeah. So this is the second phase of the Troubled Families Programme. There was a first phase 2 years previously. This was called the Extended Programme because they opened it up for children in need. It used to be much more focused on adolescence and crime and antisocial behaviour and education, and it opened it up to family needs. Employment became much more of a target. They added on sort of bonus claims and so on. So that's why it became the Extended Programme.
So what could this happen?
Thanks, Jay. Just 2.2, the 6 eligible criteria.
Yes.
As those are not going anywhere soon, because it's a continuous thing, I find it very strange that this program will end in 2020. So what is in place? Are the government thinking anything, or are we thinking anything to suggest to them?
So from what I've so yes, those are all very important areas for intervention, and they are included within the family wellbeing service criteria, with others as well. So that's how we're going to try and address it locally, to have a service that's 0 to 25, taking into account some of the additional needs of young adults. And it will include not crime and antisocial behaviour specifically, but the child's behaviour that may be impacting on the family. So that could be a range of behaviours and is impacting on the functioning of the family, the parents' mental health, of the child's mental health, domestic violence, violence in the home, poor school attendance. So those will be part of the new family wellbeing service. From a national perspective, what I've gleaned from the briefings, there's the Secretary of State has said that they're very interested in looking at early interventions of the first 1,001 days in a child's life. That's come up as something that seems very important. And of course there's a whole push and a whole push around knife crime and serious youth violence, which I think are actually seen as separate. So early help is being seen as much more as the early years, and then there's the proactive interventions around crime and such behaviour. That's what I've gleaned from the briefings, from the Commons briefings around troubled families.
If you're going to be looking at, or government say we're meant to be looking at the first 1,000 days, I'm an ex-midwife, I just wondered who else in the health service you'd be working with, because they're the people who are at the forefront. And so it's no point starting at school age. You need to start long before that. And there isn't anything about parental education. And some parents really don't know where to go and what to start with. Because most of us weren't told anything about parenting. You just have a child and then, what do I do next? And so I just wonder, where does that come in? Adulted employment is one thing, but it's long before that. Oh, so are you working with midwives and other people?
Yeah, I'd like to come in because I'd like to distinguish between the narrow criteria for the funding of this programme and the general work that is done by Children's Schools and Families and our partners in Merton across the range of difficulties that impact on families and make things challenging. So we have a 0 to 5 service which is integrated with health visiting, works closely with midwifery and perinatal mental health, and works with school nursing for the older age groups. So there is
work in place very strongly focused on the early years from an early health and prevention point of view. That work is going to be part of the family wellbeing service, which this proposal integrates this work into, but that work happened before, during and will continue after the Troubled Families Programme, whatever happens to the Troubled Families Programme. So essentially, as a Children's Schools and Families Department, in collaboration with our partners, what we look at is the whole range of things that impact on family wellbeing, and the services that we deliver aim to tackle those issues at the earliest opportunity at every stage of young people's life and at every point in family life. And when we have an opportunity to get funding from any government department with any strings attached, we really go for it, and we work with the parameters that are set, and we will do everything that we can to secure the best results against those criteria. But if that funding is withdrawn, if there isn't funding for these criteria, if there isn't funding, as there is currently for some niche work with children of alcohol-dependent parents, if there isn't work for funding available around adults with mental health issues, we'll nevertheless continue to identify those families with vulnerability and to work with them to the greatest extent that our funding and staffing allows. So I think that's the main thing to hold on to as members around this table is whatever happens with this funding and these commitments, if a programme is withdrawn, we'll continue to find every way we can within the means at our disposal to work with those families to meet their needs and support them to parent well.
So connected to whatever the report that needs to get decided. For me, it's reassuring.
I assume it's something we assume because it's children's schools and families that it embodies a lot, but I understand what you mean about specifically to qualify it. Agatha?
Sorry, thank you for the report. You said that the government's thinking of funding for preventative, starting during the first 1,000 days of a young years, preventative measures. Have they said they're going to do it? Have they said how long they're going to do it? Or is it just one of those whims that suddenly just popped up again? Because it's like with history repeating itself, we're going backwards again.
So this is really all I've gleaned from the Commons briefings when I'm trying to find out any hint of any direction around the Troubled Families Grant. So it's just in Commons briefings that I'm reading, and it was a quote from the Secretary of State saying that they were interested in, if they were to continue with the Troubled Families Programme, they were interested in those first 1,001 years. So I think we're in a good place with the Family Wellbeing Service restructure that includes the 0 to 5, Bond Row Family Support Service, and the Troubled Families Direct Working Team. All of that will be coming together. So whatever the grant funding they desire, we should be able to meet it because we're developing a service that will be focused on all of those range of needs.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Just want to ask a question. When the funding finished, is it because having read it and looked through and listened to what has been said, it's a possibility that it may move on into private sectors, into private agencies' hands for what the outcome going to be when the funding is finished in this direction.
So that's what we're proposing as far as the Family Wellbeing Service, so that would be within the Children's Schools and Families Directorate. So there's no privatisation in the plan, in the Family Wellbeing Service restructure plan. It's to use our existing resources across the age ranges to bring together a 0 to 25 service.
If I may, I was going to mention this as part of my Cabinet members' updates anyway, seeing as I'll segue into it, but whilst Roberta's here, I thought I'd comment on this. I wanted to talk a bit about building the Family Wellbeing Service, and to echo what has been said by Rachel and Roberta already. I think that building the service provides us with some resilience. We're less reliant on a single grant. It builds resilience for us as a department, but also for the families, because it means that when a grant ends, they won't be left on a cliff edge, as it were, with no possible service going forwards. It also builds into some of our other priorities across the council. So putting a think family approach in and building on some of our, so there's sort of a no wrong door for families who are struggling, regardless of whether that's due to poor health of them or their child, or attendance, children in need, etc., etc. It also builds on our safeguarding practices and some of the priorities of the new partnership, because it is things like an early help system that works from 0 to 25, focusing on bringing together services that deal with domestic abuse and neglect and the effect that has on families, and bringing together these different disciplines and embedding a shared practice model so that we have a shared language to talk amongst those services and shared outcomes for those families, rather than saying that the troubled families scheme has certain outcomes they must meet, but other families that don't necessarily reach that level, what are their outcomes, what do they look like, are they the same, are they different? So I think it's building resilience into the system whilst also empowering some of our families. I think it's a very positive thing to do.
Thank you. Roberta, thank you very much for an interesting board and vital work, because it used to be, give me a child until they were 7 and I will give you that very sexist statement in the 70s. And there was the programme that still goes on the TV, but now it is until they're 3, and those are vital years. So the more work done with younger children, the more it benefits society. So yours is vital work, and I know Rachel will fight every inch of the way to keep it going. I have no worries there. Thank you very much indeed. And if you could, I wrote 2 things to send us the appendices and the outcome plan, and
Sure, right. I'll do my
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're moving on now to item 5, the Swinley next programme. John, would you like to
Do you want the cabinet member priorities on this stage?
Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. Because I've got so many hours going backwards and forwards.
I know.
Yes, please. Did you want to continue, Kelly?
I might as
As
well.
you've started.
I have. I'll start so I'll finish. I wanted to build on what I was saying just then about the new safeguarding partnership priorities. So for the business year 19-21, some of the things I was talking about earlier with the family wellbeing service are the 3 priorities of early help, think family and contextual safeguarding. I just wanted to build on those a little so that you know that these are some of the priorities that the Safeguarding Partnership, which is a multidisciplinary partnership covering the police, the NHS, ourselves, schools also attend, are looking at. So early help is part of building this whole system approach from 0 to 25, and is our opportunity to look at what the real local need is. We want to ensure that there's a clear coordination and quality assurance for early help, with effective integration from the front door, with a shared focus on the journey and experience of the family and child. So that's across the different partners, but also making sure that we have that shared language, we understand what we're talking about, and some of the family wellbeing service will work into that very well. As safeguarding referrals come through, 2 key themes that we've seen repeated over and over is the effect of domestic abuse and neglect on our young people. So the Safeguarding Partnership is going to be actively monitoring, promoting, coordinating and evaluating the work of partner agencies to help protect children at risk of domestic abuse and neglect. And then thirdly is contextual safeguarding, and I'm sure that Roberta would have been able to talk much more eloquently on that than I am able to. But that's to make sure that we have a highly coordinated multi-agency approach that brings together the range of adolescent risks that occur in contexts beyond the family home. So I like to think of it as 3 ever-expanding circles. You've got the early help at the beginning, thinking about the effect of so early help sort of focuses on the child, think family thinks about family, and then contextual safeguarding thinks about everything outside of the family. And on a practical note, we're recruiting a young Scrutiny. So we've got to recruit an independent chair in Scrutiny as part of the new partnership framework, but we've gone a bit above and beyond as part of our commitment to youth voice, and I understand that other boroughs are doing the same now, which is really heartening to hear. I already talked about the family wellbeing service. In terms of social care, I just wanted to highlight something from the Departmental report. You'll probably have seen that London Labour councils have opened up our US rota from 0.07% to 0.08%. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but that gives us the ability to look after a couple extra young children who are incredibly vulnerable, who are already here, but we're able to provide them with the support and the welcome that we know Merton can provide. That's something that I think as a Labour Council we can be really rightly proud of. And to be fair, I think we can be proud of that cross-council. We all have a commitment to looking after some of these most vulnerable people, and I hope you will join me in welcoming them in whatever capacity you can. And on that note, you would be corporate parents for those unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, as you are for most of our children who are looked after and our care experience children. And as such, I would like to highlight the Keeping Residents Safe training that Rachel provided. I know that Jennifer attended. I'm not sure who else. You were there, Sarah, weren't you? Yeah. If any of you haven't seen it, I'm sure that we can circulate the slides. I would be very keen for all of you to sign up as a refresher about what it means to be a corporate parent at this council, and also have a look at the LGA guidance on corporate parenting, just because if you sit on other panels, it's your opportunity to be a champion for these children, and you can really have a look at what it means to create a whole council approach to some children who we have to stand in as parents for, so we really have to treat them as we would treat our own children. I say that, not having children myself, but not being that much older than these children that we look after. So I would really hope that you'd be able to do that as members of this board, but also as councillors who are corporate parents. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Has anyone got any questions? James?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your report, and it's the borough's very well served by having people who are so passionate in these roles. What I wanted to ask you, having said that, what I wanted to ask you was how you've talked a lot tonight in a lot of detail about the areas that in your remit, in your brief. How do you measure, and you can only really talk generally because I appreciate that the answer would be long, but how are you measuring success? You've briefed us on really important initiatives. You've obviously got a very professional core of officers who are responsible to you, but how are you as a layperson, how are you setting targets in your own mind and with your officer team, and how are you measuring whether the important initiatives you've told us about tonight, what does success look like for you? If you were sitting here in a year's time, what would you expect to be telling us?
So I think that one thing that immediately springs to mind is the outcome I'd like to see in counsellor engagement in corporate parenting. So corporate parenting being raised in other forums, not just children and young people scrutiny. So that's things like at licensing, do you consider the impact that some of the changes that are being implemented would have on young people in the borough? It's things like ensuring that officers are talking to one another about young people when they're developing plans. If, for example, in the, I think it's the community social paper that came through the other day that was about communicating with residents, there wasn't actually a clear commitment to communicating with young people of the borough other than looking at, we're going to send a survey to youth groups. It's about including bit by bit and building up that base so that eventually we have a much wider understanding cross-council of our commitment to young people. That also involves looking at youth voice in all of this. So the more young people have in appropriate forums, the better. The more opportunity they have to contribute to things that the council does, the better. I think that's the outward stuff that you can look at as a layperson or someone who turns up at any council meeting and go, that's new, that's different, that's change. I think there's also something about constant KPI scrutiny, performance monitoring, making sure that our suite of data out of Mosaic is correct and reliable and contextualised. And then there's about making sure that the department is working cohesively within itself as well as across the different departments. So, making sure that we have an appropriate approach unified around a wellbeing model or a practice model that everyone's using the same language that you can actually see in reports, for example.
So thank you very much for that. So maybe, is scrutiny, well, challenge is the least favourite part of my job, but as we're here to hold Cabinet to account, they seem like good aims. So let's see how they develop over the next year, and I assume they've been minuted, and hopefully those are the areas you'll be able to focus on and report back, and we can see, just as you're saying, that we can see that progression over time. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jim. Kelly, are you planning to link schools and colleges into this corporate parenting? Because in fact, to me, I think it makes a lot of it's important because they're still there learning, and that's, if we work together in partnership, we should get a better out.
So, for example, I think one practical way of articulating that is, showing that, is that we have a virtual school, and the virtual school links up and looks at the outcomes for our children looked after, those with who are care experienced, sees where they are in school, whether it's in the borough or out of the borough, looks at their outcomes, looks at what they're going on to do at university, for example. So they sit above the schools, wherever the children may be placed, and Eleanor and I often have conversations about making sure that those cohorts of children within our schools are appropriately looked after.
Just to build on that, so every school will explicitly know which children in their school are from a child in care, and they get some additional funding towards that, and that they'll be expected to provide additional support to them. That's a core part of their role and our expectations of them.
Kelly, can I ask you a couple of questions around adoption and fostering?
Sure.
Particularly in terms of how, with the temporary relocation of allied services, is that having a massive effect on the adoption service, or is it being quite smooth? And my second question in regard to fostering, because of the quite larger than you would like numbers on agency fostering, which is obviously more expensive also. I can see that in terms of those people who have been put in place like permanent managers, but what is the target going forward? So where would you like, what would you like to see with fostering?
So in terms of smooth transfer, I assume you're talking about the move to the regional adoption agency. On the ground, Rachel will probably be better to articulate how that feels for staff at the moment and how they are adapting to those changes. In terms of fostering, we'd like to see as few agency workers as possible, both because of the cost and the impact it has for permanency on our children. If we have in-house foster carers and support, it means that we can look after those children, not in a better way, but in a more sustainable way, I'd say. So as few as possible would be my answer to that. And I know that's not exactly a 5%, 10%, etc. But I do think that constantly committing to making sure that we find families within our community who want to foster. That's the best thing that we can do.
So I'll let make some additional remarks in relation to Hayley's questions in a moment, but I just wanted to say something about corporate parenting in the context of our ask to schools, and also actually our ask to our health colleagues and our ask to police and our ask to community partners, which is that the distinctive role of corporate parent falls to this local authority because we are legally the parents of these children. We have parental responsibility for the children in our care, and so our task as corporate parents is to be as sharp-elbowed on behalf of these children as we would be for our own, and in that sense to go to the schools and make sure that our expectations of what they offer our children are as high as we'd expect for our own children, to make sure that the health services that are being provided to our children are as they would be for the children in our own families, to make sure that, for example, when the police get involved with the young person, they're not criminalised to a greater extent than the children in our own families would be if they got into a spot of bother that didn't need a more forceful police response. So that's the distinction. I think all of our partners in the community have responsibility towards Merton's children to kind of secure their wellbeing outcomes. But our duty as officers and as members of this local authority is to really take seriously that responsibility to be their parents for them. So that's the piece about corporate parenting. Then in relation to the regional adoption agency, the transfer of work to the regional adoption agency has been very smooth. That's been eased largely by the fact that Merton is a hub is a spoke to Southwark's hub in the southwest. You can tell I'm treating us as a hub. So that means that our adoption staff haven't moved anywhere. They've carried on working in the same places and still co-located with their colleagues. We've had equally a relatively smooth move to the temporary relocation of the allied services, and that's just the parts of the service that weren't formally moved into the RAA have also stayed where they are, but they've been moved under different line management because we've had to make that formal separation. The one area where I think that we would all say that we haven't achieved quite the smoothness that we'd want is that in becoming the kind of southwest spoke for the RAA, we should be welcoming and co-locating members of staff from other local authorities who've now joined us as part of that, and we've had some real difficulties in making that accommodation work smoothly. So I think probably Merton has less disruption as a result of the RAA than some of our neighbouring authorities who are seeking to join us here, and we're trying to smooth that out behind the scenes quietly. Then the final thing is about ambitions around foster care. Councillor Ford is right that our aspiration would be to have as many children as we possibly could in local foster care. One of the things that we've done to try and improve that is to provide additional support for foster carers so that they can foster more than one child at a time where they've got space to do so. We've increased the amount of young people placed with local foster carers as a result. So it's not just about increasing numbers of foster carers, it is also about supporting them to look after more than one child at a time. We continue to kind of press ahead with our recruitment of foster carers, but we are behind target for this year, and that will be challenging for us because we would seek to recruit 20 in any given year, and we're further behind than we would need to be if we're planning to meet that target. So that's an area for remedial action for us. And the last thing to say is, although we would try to avoid using IFAs, that's independent fostering agencies, wherever possible, there are times when it's absolutely the right place for that child. And the two most common reasons for that is when a young person has very complex additional needs and a highly specialised placement is necessary. And then we would probably look to an IFA which has got a specialism in working with foster carers who can do that piece of work. And the other is where, for whatever reason, a young person can't be safe in and around the neighbourhood.
A small number of young people,
For a small number of young people, that's the case. They're absolutely not able to be safely in the neighbourhood, and in those cases we're much more likely to find an IFA as the most suitable. So we'll never get to the stage, I don't think, where it's 100% of Merton children in Merton in-house foster care for those kind of reasons.
Thank you, Chair. I think anyone could answer this question. I just want to find out how closely you work with the carers, and if and when any of our young people should be expelled from school or any issues, how soon do you know about it and how do you address it?
So that that isn't necessarily a question for me. I think that more closely falls under Eleanor's portfolio. Perhaps that's something that you can pick up after your report.
Could I just thank Kelly for her update and work that she has been undertaking in her position. However, my kind of question is, how do you intend to monitor or guarantee a whole council approach to corporate parenting?
Firstly, training. I think that the training that we have provided to date hasn't been as robust as it could be. I don't think it's as updated as it could be, and I think that's largely because as new councillors come on, it's part of the HR induction, but it's not something that's live. So making sure that it's something that everyone understands as a priority is really important to me. So working on, for example, with Rachel and making sure that those training courses are run regularly, well attended, implemented by HR with HR so that everyone understands the need for them. Then after that, it requires quite a lot of lobbying on my behalf, getting into meetings that other people don't necessarily understand why I need to be there. That could be things like looking at built environment, talking to James McGinley and Chris Lee about the need for young people to be involved in consultation and design. It could be talking to the chair of licensing and just asking, do you scrutinise based on what the children's needs are, the impact it can have on little ones, old ones, and everything in between. So if you have a look at the LGA corporate parenting guidance, it has a table in it that we were showing at the corporate parenting group very helpfully about the areas in which corporate parenting principles really come into play. So I'm happy to disseminate that after the meeting, and if I'm always happy to have those conversations. It's not something that can have a KPI attached to it. It's much more, I think, about soft influence and raising awareness, and I would welcome any support from any of you guys in making that happen.
Thank you. Kelly or Rachel, about the fostering. You said you haven't reached your target this year. Do you know why you haven't reached the target, what the issues are, and how you're going to go about trying to reach your target? Maybe not this year, you said maybe next year. But if there's an issue, how are you going to overcome those issues?
So this year we have followed actually a very successful year last year by trying to replicate what we did last year, which was so successful, and just weirdly this year it doesn't seem to have worked in quite the same way. So we've had, we completely revamped our marketing materials last year, talking about people needing to have space in their home and in their heart. And it was a real kind of hearts and minds approach. I'm sure that members would have seen posters everywhere. We usually have a fostering poster in the foyer. They're often on the kind of flagpoles outside and at various points in the borough, on kind of bus stops and things like that, as well as on railings. And that revamp was really successful last year, but clearly kind of the novelty has started to wear off, and I'm not sure that we can afford to kind of revamp and rebrand our service every year. We've also, unfortunately, we've lost some funding, which was available to us to help kind of disseminate that message. Also, we are kind of somewhat underpowered in the message, and that may well have had an impact. But the other thing is we've got a number of families that are in the recruitment process at the moment, and if we're able to, if they're able to all progress successfully through to the fostering panel, the gap won't be as big as it currently looks. So some of it is to do with the families that come forward and actually whether they can successfully meet the panel requirements. So at this stage, we have some hypotheses about why we might be kind of on weaker this year than we were last year, but we don't have a definitive answer, and we'll keep pushing.
Sometimes there's a lot of word of mouth. So basically, sometimes people aren't satisfied, they're not going to pass on good information or, pass on positive things for people to do, protect themselves and service. I think you have to read the facts and see what support is really being given to foster parents. You know you're getting support, but sometimes there's not enough.
So I mean, we're always open to hearing what more we can do, but we aren't resting on our laurels there either. So we survey our foster carers regularly to assess what their views are about us and whether they think that we're meeting their needs. Overall, generally, they are. The foster carers that we've lost this year, so some have resigned. The reasons, we had the annual report actually at Corporate Parenting Board last week. The reasons have been, some of them were connected persons foster carers. That means they're specifically registered to provide foster care to people who were already known to them, to family members, and once those young people didn't need to be fostered by them anymore, they didn't wish to foster complete stranger children, and that's entirely their prerogative, so we're very grateful that they work with us for as long as they do. And the others, it wasn't any dissatisfaction with us, it was other family circumstances that meant it wasn't appropriate for them to continue. So we do, kind of exit interview for any foster carers that leave us for exactly that reason. The other thing that we're doing, which is a departure from the norm, is we're working to develop something called the Mockingbird model, and that is a piece of work which has a kind of a core foster family, which is specifically providing support to a group of other foster carers around, which means that when the foster carers around might be finding things a bit heavy going, things particularly with one child difficult, they can have some respite from that situation by that child and spend time with another carer and then returning to them, or they might do some activities together, work together to support that child. And what that does is it kind of may enable families to find that they have additional support when things are difficult, or it relieves pressure slightly. So the intention is that core family unit will provide support for a wider number around, and that's something that we've received funding to roll out. So that's a piece of work that's ongoing.
Thank you very much.
Hello. So I was just working out, I think it's nearly 5 months that I've been cabinet member now. So I'll take you through my kind of top 3 priority areas and on some of the specific questions like that you're wondering, but I'm going to call Rachel, if that's okay. But I'll start from the kind of least soft to the most KPI ones to Keith James. So firstly, one of the main things I've been trying to do is just make sure I'm developing strong relationships directly with the schools and with the head teachers, where appropriate with some of the governors of those schools. It's going to take me a while to kind of get through them all. There's 54 schools, but for example, I was with Ursulines Day, I was with Rains Park recently, I've been to St Teresa's, trying to understand where their priority areas and issues are. And what's really interesting is they all say slightly different things, and they say things that I haven't really thought about. And sometimes things that sit outside my portfolio, but often don't quite sit within anyone's portfolio. And 2 specific examples of that is Ursulines Day were banging on about their issues with recruitment and the issues around needing more key worker housing, which is something I've been thinking about with my ward hat on, with so many developments going on in my ward, and so now I'm going to try and kind of push forward a bit with other cabinet members on that. Rains Park wanted more advice and support on what they do with the apprenticeship levy, which again, with my adult education hat on, I've been thinking about, but it kind of also sits within corporate services and HR and all these other bits. So lots of issues that affect schools aren't all necessarily core education issues, but I'm trying to see as my role to kind of be their ambassador and speak up for them and get some of those looked at. I spend a lot of time just getting updates and asking for updates about performance of schools, both in terms of Ofsted and obviously the kind of results like GCSEs and Key Stage 2, so we don't have the fully validated figures yet, but going through the early figures with the officers, and understanding what it is that we're doing as Merton to support schools to do better on all those things. So if you've been paying attention, you'll know that there's a new Ofsted framework which schools and adult education, which is being inspected this week, are being inspected under, which has more of a focus on curriculum. So we're having our first schools going through that, so understanding what it is that we're doing to support schools around that, what the groups like Attain are doing to provide school-to-school improvements, understanding how we're developing effective governance across Merton as well. And I want to play more of a role in making sure that we're using, getting really high-quality governors into local authority governor places, which is something I want to come to a couple of years on, actually. So that's kind of performance area. We had some good news on kind of Ofsted results, like rural PR results were good over the summer. Like I say, we were waiting to see the kind of full progress ones. But on Ofsted, for example, Beach Home, which was previously a required improvement school, is now good, or sorry, it was an adequate school is now good, which is brilliant. So we're at 95% good or outstanding, which I'm really pleased with. And then the final one, and the one which is taking up most of my headspace, and I don't think it's been discussed enough really, if I wanted to kind of at this meeting, is the SEND overspends, which comes up in Rachel's departmental report. And I think why it hasn't been really, I've been trying to get my head around generally why it hasn't been focused on them. It was kind of hidden away in the dedicated schools grant bit of the budget. So in all the budget monitoring, it's kind of escaped notice because that feels different, and there was an underspend, so it's been able to be covered, and then suddenly it's kind of creeping into a bigger overspend that can't be covered within the dedicated schools grant. Just at a high level, what the issue is we've essentially got more young people with education, health and care plans, and those plans come with more responsibilities and eligibilities than we were used to, and part of that increase in the numbers is an increase in their age range, so it's from down to 0 up to 25. So this is very much a national issue, it's not just a Merton issue, and one thing that I'm trying to do is make sure that we're learning from other boroughs. So Kelly and I went to a brilliant session with London councils to hear about how other councils are dealing with this, and again what's interesting to hear is what's similar but also what's different across different places. So we have some particular pressures on places, which means that we have a lot of young people with education, health and care plans going to independent provisions, and talking about private schools essentially, which we pay for, which are very expensive, very costly. So when some politicians talk about closing down private schools and bringing them within the state sector, I don't think they're talking about the ones that I'm worrying about, but it would very much help our budget if they could be taken within the state sector. I'm not getting political. But we are doing things to address that, like building more special school places, which again comes up in the reports, and we need to keep focusing on that. But that is going to be a top priority for the team for the foreseeable future, because we have to report back to the department on why we've got an overspend and what we're doing about it and how we're trying to address it. And there are no easy answers, if I'm being honest. Joining a particular point about working with academies. So broadly, I think in Merton we've got a good relationship with our academies. There are still some just general frustrations about the structure, which means that, for example, when Benedict, which was an academy, was rated by Ofsted, that there's not much power that the council can have over that, and I found that as a cabinet member intensely frustrating. And we might be able to give you an update on that or not. On your specific question about how soon we know about exclusions, I don't know. I know kind of a high-level data that we get, so I'll leave Rachel to answer, if that's okay, or Jane, about how quickly we get updates on those from academy schools.
Thank you.
Just a little bit. I'll ask Jane to talk in more detail about how we work around exclusions with not only schools, of course, in the borough, but schools outside the borough as well, because Merton children are educated elsewhere. But on the specific point about looked after children and exclusions, we've certainly not had a looked after child permanently excluded while I've been director, and I think for a considerable number of years before that. So we fight tooth and nail to keep our looked after children in education of some kind, regardless of what happens. Permanent exclusions would be notified to us because we need to secure alternative placements for those children. Fixed term exclusions won't come through as quickly, but we do monitor them across all of our schools, so we keep an eye on that, and it's part of the performance measures that we monitor at my DMT monthly.
Yes, so as Rachel said, if it's permanent exclusion, we would know about it really quickly, because within 5 days we've got to find alternative provision for them. Fixed term exclusions, I don't think there's a difference between a noticeable difference between academies and other maintained schools. We just have some schools that let us know much more quickly because they may be asking for support. So once a child's had a number of fixed term exclusions, we would be wanting to go in and have a look at that. And schools use fixed term exclusions in different ways, so we monitor that and keep an eye on that. So we would look at it within my sort of management team alongside all the other information we're looking at about schools, so that it might give us an indication that the school might need more support or might be having particular difficulties. So generally we would know quite quickly, because we've got a number of support services that are out working in schools and looking at those particular children. So we would hope. I don't, but there's no noticeable difference that I can report to you that our academy's not talking to us about those.
Thank you. Can I just follow up Joan's point, because I don't know if you got the idea, perhaps listening to the same radio interview as I did, but something about academies, if they've excluded a child for more than 5 days, it becomes the local authority's responsibility. Is this right? It was just, you know, when you're driving around and you hear bits on the radio and you haven't heard the whole programme, there was something of a discussion on the radio about that.
That's in relation to permanent exclusions, but for fixed term exclusions, it's not, it's the school's responsibility if it goes over 5 days to provide alternative.
Thank you for that. James?
Chair, thank you. It's not a pecuniary interest, but some of the issues that Eleanor raised would to do with special schools. I'm chair of governors at a special school, so I'd just declare that interest. My question was, it's absolutely amazing and fantastic that nearly all our schools are outstanding or good, and that's a credit to the administration and to the officers. But my question for you as cabinet member is the 4 that aren't yet, and inevitably there are always going to be some that aren't, but I'm interested to know your focus for those and whether those 4 have yet been on your list to visit, and what you're doing as cabinet member to get even those ones across the line as well. And this is notwithstanding the fact that the record is fantastic, but hopefully as cabinet member your thoughts are very much on those 4 as well. Thank you.
Good question. And no, I haven't been to visit them. I've taken the view so far that I wasn't trying to get to know schools. The schools who are getting the most attention from us and from our officers are exactly those schools. So me wading in at this point is maybe not best for them. If you're in touch with any of them, you know any of them, I've got a friend who happens to be Benedict, who is, for example, keen for me to go and visit anyway, or West Midlands or something, and they're happy to have a kind of informal chat with me, which won't be a kind of officer level support and challenge discussion. I'd be very happy to. But yeah, they are, the team are very clear, we're all very clear about which schools it is that we're worried about. And they're not just those schools, if we're honest. There are others that we know are kind of rated well but might not have been expected for a while, or might be rated well but their results look like they're dipping. There's a kind of a large number, not a large number, that's definitely don't know that. There are a larger than the handful that are rated as alright that we're actually actively concerned about.
Thank you for that, and that's great that those are your focus and that there are other schools you're watching as well. I would just make the observation that it's your decision how you do it, but I'd have thought those 4 would be absolutely the schools you're, to quote you, wading into, but I appreciate there are lots of schools, not just those 4. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. SEN, it's always been an issue. It's always been sort of lack of funding. I mean, years ago there was big funding and all that sort of children an issue, but not as we have now. But what are we trying to do about it? Are we trying to lobby to get more funding with other sort of councils? Because no matter what we say or talk about the SEN, we are still going to have children with special educational needs. And as you say, what's happening, they're coming up with very complex sort of problems, and we do need to do something constructive about trying to get more money. It's difficult, but if we keep knocking on the door or keep pounding and making the government feel guilty, or I don't know if they've got a sense of guilt or anything. So maybe if we do that, maybe we might be able to get something, because every year the criteria sort of for the getting funding or getting is big and it changes, and it gets higher and higher, and some children need it and they don't get it, so due to lack of funding. So if you can do something, maybe things will improve. I mean, that's my wish list anyway.
Can I just come in on that, because we've got a work programme, and at the pre-meet we decided to change the work programme and send is on it. So do you think that might be best left to come up there when it can be dealt with much more thoroughly in greater detail?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you want to...
I can support
an explanation.
No, you're welcome to
it. As much as you can give me, then we can go into
it's going to come up in more
Well, I'll do a
detail.
quick answer to this, and it comes up in the departmental report, and Rachel and Jane, they want to come in. The first thing, that last point, it's not actually kind of getting harder and harder to get assessments. We're trying to be very fair in how we give assessments. And one thing we should say actually was in the departmental report is Ofsted inspected Merton's whole SEND service, and they identified some areas for improvement. But assessment was not really one of them. They thought actually we were being quite fair there and doing a good job. The money is an issue, so my headline concern is that I want to deliver the service that we should be delivering for these young people. We should be actively identifying these young people, delivering the service that we should be for them, but also not bankrupting the council. And this is the balance that we've got to get. So a huge chunk of that is trying to get more money. So Kelly and I jointly signed a letter with a lot of London Council cabinet members calling on the government for this. Lots of other people are doing lobbying on this. I want to get involved. There's more that we could be doing. It's not just a Merton issue, that is. But at the same time, are there some things that we could be doing within the team to try and run the service more effectively so that we can try and do that balance of spending, overall spending a bit less but delivering the same outcomes. Again, this comes up in the departmental update, so like the restructuring of the SEND team and so on. But if Rachel or Jane want to
I just wanted to also add, as well as working with other London councils, both Ellen and I regularly attend different forums where there are groups of directors, assistant directors, cabinet members, heads of service, etc., to look at both best practice and how we can best pool our resources in order to lobby, to articulate what we need and then lobby for it. So that's both through London councils, the Local Government Association. I know this quite regularly comes up at the Association of Children's Services, isn't it? And other forums. So we don't rest easy on this, and we're always, if there were a silver bullet, we would hope it would have been shared in those forums by now. However, we're always on the hunt and we'll never give up. I think is the short answer.
I'm not sure where this fits in, but it's something that bothers me because it's a school in my ward. So transitioning from mainstream to SEN, how do you cope with that? And in particular, Stanford School.
It's transitioning, but yeah, as part of us remaining the school, we were opening up a new site on this, and probably Rachel told us to give you a kind of detailed update on that. It's not open yet, so we're just in the kind of building stage.
The reason I'm asking, there are children there who, and it's obvious that it will always be like that, but they still have a year or two to go. And so what support is there? Because I'm getting mixed messages from parents about how their children are coping or not coping. And that's why I want to know what's going on.
So I suppose I need to understand a bit better about what you mean about transitioning, and whether you mean changes to the school or whether you mean changes for individual children.
It's really, you could say individual children. The children who are left, who are year 5 or moving on, because where they are, they haven't just moved and we have got just SEN children. We have the mainstream children who finished. And they feel a little bit uncomfortable, and parents are a bit worried because they feel they're not getting the support that they should.
I think I still need to better understand what the issues are for those individuals. So the school is not ceasing to provide mainstream education. So there will be children with additional needs who should have school support, or where they meet the requirement should have an education plan. And there will be children who don't have any additional needs and they should have mainstream, they'll be receiving mainstream education without the need for additional support. So when we make changes to increase provision for young people with additional needs at a school, that's not at the expense of children, the mainstream children without needs. It's about providing extra resources for children with additional needs. So if parents are worried that their child has additional needs that haven't been recognised, then that would.
It's not the additional needs. It's the ones without any problems.
Yeah.
who are still there waiting to move on because they haven't got to the time to move to to a mainstream area, secondary school. And can I talk to you outside?
Yes, I'll take this one.
Yeah, I'll take it.
And I also think how to do this is coming up in the questions that we raised.
I'm puzzled by what it might be actually.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, we'll now move on. Tom. That's agenda item 5 on this page 5 of the we have read it.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's anything particularly you can see in the highlighting. Scrutinised every amount. But people will have questions. But if there's anything you particularly want to say.
Not particularly. I mean, just a summary of where we are in terms of clearly we have a backlog maintenance. We are spending more than we used to. We think we're prioritising in a fair way. But clearly there is still a lot of work that will need to be done over many years. But just, happy just to take questions really.
Has anyone got any questions? I don't know.
PSI, what's happening?
The PFI contract is still with us until December 2029, so just over 10 years and counting down.
I thought it was shorter than that.
No, it was 25 years from when the build was completed in late 2004. So I mean there are issues there. Still, it continues to be a difficult contract. We don't think the PFI contractor, for example, is maintaining the estate in the way they should be. To assist us, one of the big issues with the PFI contract is that you've got a very specialist industry who are specialists at avoiding doing things, and you've got us as lay contracting people. So what we've done in the last 6 months is brought in a specialist company called CPP to assist us in that contract monitoring. A series of phases which we are contracting with them to help us with, and they're at the stage of completing stage 1 of that report. Not surprising us, they don't think that the PFI contractor is maintaining the estate in the way they should do. They're recommending a number of strategies which we are discussing with them at the moment for deciding how to follow through with it, to trying to help us through it.
Do you think it would work?
Yes, I mean it's not going to. It's a hard slog and it's not going to change immediately. But I think they will help give us the tools to hold them to account in the way they perhaps haven't in the years to date.
James.
Chair, thank you. 2 questions. The first is, I'm not sure that it is, but given how often boilers are talked about in this report, is there any alternative? I mean, we maybe don't have the resource, but is it worth biting the bullet now and finding an alternative that could save money over a number of years? And it may well be there isn't an alternative. And my second question was with the capital maintenance and revenue maintenance, is that, in terms of where that line falls, can there be a sort of general strategy of encouraging the schools to do more and more, given that nowadays they tend to have more money than we have? Is that something that you look at, or is that not something that can happen? Thank you.
I mean, in terms of boilers, I mean, clearly buildings get old and they do need to be replaced. I mean, the secret is obviously getting there in time, and boilers will need to replace. They're just sort of a bigger version of your domestic boilers, so they don't last forever. So inevitably, investment will go into there. Clearly, our priority has to be ensuring schools are warm and watertight and safe, and that clearly means why boilers are right up there, because they have to be done. So particularly when we have a backlog, that is inevitably where we are prioritising a lot of our money at the moment, and quite rightly, because as soon as it goes for a day, boiler breaks down for a day, it generally means a school closure, so it has to be the highest priority. In terms of your second question about revenue maintenance, schools are encouraged to. There is a very distinct line in the scheme for finance in schools of about 6 pages of examples of what is a revenue and what is a capital item. We do encourage them, but clearly we can't make them, and certainly there are examples where schools don't necessarily look after their building and it does lead to a capital item, but it's very difficult to manage and prevent a school doing it. So really, it is a delegated item that isn't that easy to manage, and particularly it is difficult for schools now with their budgets being tighter than they have been for quite a while.
Can I, just as a follow-up, can I ask, and I completely appreciate what you're saying, it's not easy, but given there might be the odd example of, as you're saying, a school that might literally allow matters that should be in revenue maintenance to go on so long that they become your responsibility, they become a capital maintenance issue. Is that not something, and you probably already do, but I mean that's presumably something that we need to police and push back on as much as we can?
I'd say probably yes. I don't think we've got the staff resources to do it properly, but you're probably, I think the answer is, theoretically yes, but in reality not at the moment, and it's not the absolute top priority, but yes, I agree that, I wouldn't dispute your point at all.
So it's not something to come back to, it's just something to leave you with. I'm not asking for any follow-up, but it does seem, I don't know what sort of numbers are involved, and you may not either, but the numbers could be significant, presumably. So it's just something to bear in mind that it may be something going forward for to be looked at in terms of whether there should be some pushback on schools where that's happening. But just to be clear, it's a professional matter, so I'm not asking for any feedback, but maybe just to leave it with you. Because it strikes me the numbers could be quite high. Thank you.
Joan. Thank you for your report. And I just want to find out about asbestos. I realise that almost all the schools in your report, you found there was asbestos in them, but just want to find out, are there more schools? Do you still have schools with asbestos? And if so, when will they be addressed?
Basically, any school building really built but before the late 80s will have asbestos in some place. It was everywhere, used throughout. So it's not practical or even safe or recommended by the Health and Safety Executive to remove that asbestos, but it needs to be managed. So that's why through our corporate health and safety team we have pretty rigorous procedures to ensure that is managed. All schools have got a detailed asbestos survey and management plan attached to it, and that is reviewed annually. When any works are undertaken that could disturb that asbestos, a special survey is undertaken to ensure that is managed. So yes, asbestos is in our buildings, and I think that will continue to be the case until they are all demolished, but it is a management action rather than something that is ever practical, would be ever recommended, just to have a programme of removing all asbestos from our schools.
And they're not listed all children?
No, exactly. I mean, that's the idea of the asbestos management plan. Is unless asbestos is disturbed, it's not a risk to children. It's hidden away within, not disturbed, behind asbestos. It's not a risk to children. No.
I think it's a question for you, Tom. It might be for Eleanor.
It could probably just about be read. I've literally got the first draft of the stage one off the printer about half an hour ago. So I don't see why it could come to the November meeting yet, if that's what the committee would like. Otherwise, it could be delayed till January, depending on the programme.
In reference to the capital maintenance needs, do we know why the 18-19 figure is so much higher than the other years?
Well, in terms of the budget,
Well,
or in terms of the backlog.
Yeah.
The way they did it, they visited in late 2017, and there was a limited amount of work that they showed that absolutely had to be taken as a health and safety issue, and a number of items which were a backlog that really need to be carried out. So the fact they came in at that time and identified immediate works meant that figure was high at that time.
Thank you. Tom, I've got a couple of questions for you. One, I did ask for it to be passed on to you about solar panels. I think it's excellent that you've, at enormous expense really, installed it in, I don't know how many of our schools, but a good majority of our schools. And there were two parts to my question. Was, what's the return on the solar panels? Not what it's saving the schools, but what return are you, as we as authority, getting from these schools? And also, when a school becomes an academy, they're still getting their benefit, but do they feed in the readings for you to make a claim on your return?
Yes, in terms of number of schools, 28 schools have solar panels. There's a mixture of what's called a feed-in tariff, which is effectively a subsidy that comes from government, and then the actual electricity saving. The initial assumption was that there should be payback within 10 years. I've been informed that we're just about on that. 10.5 years is currently the payback from them, so it's working as it should be. If it wasn't for the feed-in tariff, I think the payback would be about 20 years. So the authority put in all the capital from it. We didn't have contracts with some of these less reputable leasing companies. We actually found the capital ourselves, got a spend to save case, so the council ensures it gets that money back, although the school gets an element of the energy savings back as well. When a school becomes an academy, we have a more complicated document to ensure those liabilities are kept, and so the council protects its interests in terms of the capital investment. So the academies, I guess, are treated in exactly the same way, which was that there's a spend to save case, and the council is ensuring that it gets its investment back.
So they will pass on the reading. They will do that reading.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions, Russell?
Just on the solar panels element to start with. The solar panels are guaranteed to last 25 years, but they do not take 25 years worth of stuff. After about 10 years, they're liable to fail. And they need to be checked up on regularly by the capital officers. I'm sure you're aware of that, but you need to make sure they're going around the schools and checking that they're working. Because if one fails, they all fail. If you've got 6 readings and one is wrong, then the other 5 won't work. That's the one thing. The other thing is on page 7 in the report, 211, I presume that if the school needs adapting for a disabled child or something, that takes priority over anything else in the project.
We've certainly never, I think that's correct. We've never refused to do the work. We've always found the money to do those works whenever that has been the case.
I take it that's all the questions. Tom, thank you very much. It was an interesting report to see. I look forward to meeting you again. Thank you very much. You're free to go to meeting. Which is in a smaller booklet, page 7.
Thank you, Chair. So this departmental update has been variously referred to a couple of times already as Kay's report or as Eleanor's report.
It follows the same format that you'll remember you endorsed last time, which is that there's a short piece of information about every single team within your service area within the directorate, and under the relevant headings where Scrutiny, where this panel has specifically asked for additional information, that appears highlighted as a scrutiny request. So you'll see the first of those appearing on page 10, which is some commentary in relation to knife crime under the Adolescent and Family Services, and you'll see some further commentary which you've already spoken with Tom about under the PFI, and there's also information about early years provision, the funded places scheme, and about special educational needs and education, health and care plans. So I'm making the assumption, Chair, that you've directed us to, that people have read it, so I don't propose to take you through section by section, but just offer to answer any questions that people may have arising from this report.
Anyone have questions?
Thank you for your report. Would you be kind enough to explain that's a going for 2.20, a bit more details for me. On page 9.
Okay, so 2.20, this refers to the placements commissioning team.
Yeah.
And so we're making reference to these are young adults or older children, late teenagers who are in our care, or care experienced young people leaving our care, and the kind of housing accommodation that they need. So for some of our young adults, they need to be in what's called semi-independent accommodation. That is a place which offers them space to live, but also offers some kind of support. But for a lot of those young people, we're paying for additional support that they don't require or make use of, and to a certain extent they're not living the kind of normal life that a young adult, like for example my 19-year-old son enjoys now living away from home. So my son is living with five other people, but doesn't have support on hand, and that would be quite a usual thing for a young person of student age. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to work more closely with those young people and finding absolutely the right placement with them, only using additional support where it's absolutely required for that young person's placement. And what that does is it gives those young people greater independence, and it also reduces our costs, because we're not paying for hands-on live-in help in the premises.
So is it similar like coming back into like a semi-children's home, behaviour, attitude, or things like we getting back into?
So there has always been residential accommodation for children. We use very little of it. I think we've got probably fewer than 15 young people in residential accommodation at the moment. But for young adults, semi-independent accommodation is not as closely monitored as a children's home would be, and it's not a regulated setting. This is one of the concerns about semi-independent accommodation, but it's not the same as living independently in digs or in a studio flat or anything like that. And what we're trying to do is, where it's right for those young people, to move them into full independence, really, at the rate that's right for them. So semi-independent accommodation isn't quite like a children's home, because it's not so intrusive and it's not directly managing those young adults' lives, but it does have professionals on the premises, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Thank you for the reports. Just referring to point 2.3, where it refers to 5 stop and searches, how does this compare to the prior year?
Sorry, 2.3.
2.3. Yeah, sorry, yeah. 2.30, yeah, sorry. My fault.
So the section 60s?
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't have any section 60s in the previous year.
Do we know why there's such a high rise in comparison?
Well, firstly, I think there's been an expanded use of Section 60 powers generally across London in response to the increased knife crime everywhere. So the individual BCUs are being encouraged to make greater use of Section 60 powers where they deem it to be appropriate. And for our local BCU, they invoke those powers when there's been some kind of incident or cause for concern. So what that means is on 5 occasions in the borough, they were sufficiently concerned about probably risk of retaliation. That would be the usual reason. So there's some things occurred between some people, and in order to crack down on the possibility of retaliation, they'll put Section 60 in place.
Thank you.
Please.
Chair, thank you. Thank you very much for the report. Chair, I've got 4 quick questions. Can I just ask them all together? Is that okay?
Are there many other people who want to ask questions? No, go ahead.
Thank you. So on 2.2, towards the bottom of page 7, we've enjoyed a summer of successful exam results from our schools. Just really briefly, it would be good just to have a quick commentary on the analysis of that, together with particularly any subjects that you're concerned about. 2.3, the Ofsted inspection. Just comments on their concerns, whether you agree with the concerns that have raised, and of course we all know there are always going to be concerns from Ofsted, but it's just interesting to get your view on those concerns. Then there are several references to interim appointments being made, so it would be good just to get your comment on plans to hopefully make those permanent positions, which I'm guessing is better on the whole for the service. And the last 2 points planned, so it would be good just to get your comment on a strategy that we might adopt to try to address that going forward. Thank you.
I think Rachel covered your last point about recruiting foster parents. I don't know if you want that further developed, but would you use those thoughts?
Well, I'll take that last one first. So I did give an explanation of the hypotheses that we have about why there might be a reduction
in that case, I'm sorry, it's my fault because I obviously wasn't listening. So I've been caught out, so ignore that one and just look at the other 3.
Okay. Interims to permanent, absolutely yes, and we have some really good success actually in converting some of our interim appointments to permanent. So 2 of our recent heads of service joined us as interims in the first place and subsequently been permanently appointed. So that would always be our drive. We'd only ever use a really short-term locum in a kind of gap situation between losing a person and making a permanent appointment. The area where we have the highest number of ongoing interims is still frontline social work practice. And then 2.3, the Ofsted inspection and the concerns. So the first thing to say is that when Ofsted arrives, we are required to give a kind of presentation and an account of ourselves and say what we think our own strengths and our own weaknesses are. And to a certain extent, we offer ourselves on a plate at that point, partly because it's the right thing to do, is to be honest about where you think you stand, but also because actually Ofsted takes a very dim view of a local authority that doesn't understand itself in its own context. They are more content if you are able to show that you understand your areas for development than if you're kind of blithely going ahead thinking that you're brilliant when you're not. So we did share with them when they arrived that we had concerns about our education, health and care plans, the quality of those, and in particular around the health content of those plans. I suppose I thought probably that they would express their response to that as areas for development, but not necessarily require us to do a written statement of action. I think they thought that we had kind of accurately identified what our weaknesses were, and I was a bit surprised that it became a written statement of action. And to a certain extent, that's been reflected a little bit in the feedback that we've had from colleagues at Department for Education and NHS England, who noted the very significant number of strengths in the report across all domains, and felt that as reports go that lead to a written statement of action, ours was actually very favourable. So in the end, I suppose, the view that I take is that I'm not afraid to be held to account for the progress that we make. It's very transparent when a written statement of action is required. It helps us to have a lever with our health partners for everyone to kind of escalate this to a significant level. And the detail is largely about the strategic oversight, which is a shared duty of the health inputs to education, health and care plans, and the quality thereof as a result. You know, it twanged me a little bit, but the areas that they want us to focus on are the right ones, and I certainly don't disagree with them. And then the last one was about a bit of a commentary on 2.2, wasn't it? Jake, can I hand over to you a little bit for that?
You probably can. So, I haven't got all the details in front of me, but not expecting to be asked for the details at this point. However, we will be looking in more detail at the education standards tomorrow evening. In general, we were really pleased with the positive trajectory in terms of outcomes. Progress. We've obviously got some variation between some of our schools, and I think in terms of some of the conversation we've had earlier, what we do is kind of look at those outcomes, those schools where we're thinking, well, the results weren't quite as they were predicting, or where there's been a bit of a dip, and we make sure we put in extra support there. In terms of specific subjects, which I presume you mean at secondary, no, I would say there wasn't something where we're saying, right across the board, we're concerned about this. Again, variation between schools. We have been focused on one of the targets within Attain is around primary writing, so we continue to focus in on that as a really important area that we want to continue to improve. But obviously, as you know, we'll get the full details with all of these sorts of variations, particularly looking at groups which we don't have a breakdown on at the moment, because we wait for the validated data to do that. So I don't know if that answers that enough for you.
It does, thank you both very much. I would agree with what Rachel said about Ofsted. I think that's the same, share our role as a panel, that every local authority has challenges, and I think to have an officer team who recognise those challenges, volunteer them, and then talk to us about what the plans are, that's exactly what I feel these panels are about. And just making sure that officers know what those challenges are and that they have action plans for them. So thank you both very much.
I hope this is all Taylor wants to answer. 2.9, sentence, the second sentence, which says a number of agency staff has applied for permanent roles. Right. And they're currently undergoing routine check. And how long will that check be? Because they're agency staff, they've been working with the department for quite a while, so they must be known somewhere. Some check must have been done before they start working. So how long this routine check would be?
It's usually only a matter of a couple of weeks.
Rachel, could I just follow on from Joan's question? When they've been working for an agency and then you want them to apply for a permanent post, do you have to buy them out from the agency at all?
It depends. It depends partly on how long they've been with us and on any other agreements we might have entered into. So we look at that quite carefully. In certain circumstances, we might not take someone on as permanent until they've exhausted any duty back to the agency to buy them out. If the placement appears stable, and it'll be a financial calculation as to whether paying them at an agency rate for longer is better or worse than buying them out.
Any other questions? Rachel, thank you very much for your report. Performance managing report.
Thank you, Chair. Do you want to
Yes,
quickly introduce? No problem. So you have in front of you the performance dashboard with the measures that this group has agreed, updated to the most recent month or the most recent quarter. I want to draw your attention to a factual inaccuracy, for which I apologise, and I will be in the minutes providing the correct figure. So this is on number 21. The percentage of looked after children with agency foster carers is not 67%. That is an over representation. It was calculated incorrectly based on some of the classifications in the way we record this. It has not been possible, unfortunately, for me to have the accurate figure, but I will make sure it goes out with the minutes. So it is certainly not 67%. It was the figures that we've currently obtained from our placement team hover around the last year's figures of sort of between 40 and 46%. But I will provide the accurate figure. So I apologise for that. I guess I will take it as read, so to speak, and I'm open for any questions or lines of inquiry.
Does anyone have any questions? I've got a few.
I've got a few as well, but for Rachel, I think, as well. First of all, number 11, percentage of children become subject to child protection order. How many, what time period are we talking about for somebody to be subsequent? Is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 minutes? That one. Could somebody explain what the percentage, what number 4 means? And number 2, how many actual children is that out of? The number 2. There's a couple for Rachel. The number of reception years, surplus places, and the percentage of secondary school places, that's blank. Right? We have to wait till February for those answers, do we? Don't we know those already? And the last one for Rachel is number 34. Which is basically why do we not know? Is it because they're not well, presumably they're not in school, these children, and they're not telling the authority?
No, so we follow all of our children into their destination at age 16 or 17, and for a small number, they'll not be responding to us. So until such time as we get a response from them that says where they've gone on to college, they're recorded as not known. And for those children who we have been able to follow up and where it's clear that they're not in school or college, then they are not in education for clinical training, and then they're neat. So the ones that appear as not known, I genuinely, we don't know. And around about the 1% mark, that's a very low number of not known.
I'm just asking for clarification.
You're going to have to help me here to recall which ones you wanted.
Right. Number 30 and 31, surplus places.
So surplus places is an annual measure, so we won't report on that until February of next year. That's why those squares are greyed out, and the white empty space appears next to those for February 2020 to let you know when to expect the data will fall into there. So that's 30 and 31. Children that become subject to a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time. Is that a question about time period?
Yeah.
I think that's within 2 years. I'll verify. Maybe it's within 1.
So Ross and I talked about this. So normally the normal measure is within a time period of 2 years. Now we haven't specified it here, so I would have to go back and just absolutely make sure. I'm assuming that we follow the common counting around it, so we can benchmark ourselves against other authorities, which is collective national global DFE as well. So I'm assuming it's within 2 years, but I will have to clarify that because we haven't specified that. If it is within 2 years, I will make sure that it's marked down
on the menu.
Yeah.
Did you say you wanted number 4?
Number 4, yeah.
Child protection plans rate per 10,000. So what that is the number of child protection plans per 10,000 children. So Merton has approximately 47,000 children in the borough, and so the reason for expressing the number of child protection plans as a rate per 10,000 is it allows you to benchmark against other local authorities. Whereas if you do absolute numbers, then larger local authorities with larger number of children would automatically have more children on a child protection plan. So this lets us know roughly where we're benchmarking, and our number of children on a child protection plan is low, and as a per 10,000 rate is also low. And then the last one was number 2, single assessments authorised within statutory 45 days. I can't actually answer that question in relation to how many single assessments were conducted in August of 2019, but we can probably get that figure for you and provide it afterwards. But the total number of assessments in any month is
I'm just
relatively low.
interested in, it says 94% being viewed as having 94% of what?
Yeah, well, it's 94% of the number of assessments that were conducted in the month. I can't tell you what that number is, so I will. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Just coming in, so again, having looked at this sort of early, so this was a figure, we can provide this for the minutes later, but it was a figure of 109 out of 115 for this for the August.
Thank you very much.
Just as a point, I should have mentioned this to Carl before, but we used to get a brief narrative on anything where there were anomalies before the meeting, so that we weren't asking these questions, as part of that, because there would be some reasons that you do already know. But just for a few questions that I still have, number 16, which is the average number of weeks taken for care proceedings, that's at 31 against a target of 26 weeks. I'm wondering what's happening there. Line 17, which is cases being reviewed within required time scales, because that's running at 80%, which is obviously lower. Line 18, which I know that we've mentioned corporate parenting, but I think it's worthwhile knowing on this panel as well, is in terms of why looked after children aren't all participating in the reviews. And then I mentioned this one before, which is line 20, which is stability of placements that looked after children, is at, it looks like a strange figure at 27%. I'm going to talk about those, please.
I would have to come back to you on the on number 31 unless Rachel has some detail on the sorry, number 16, the 31 weeks, why we are above with that. Do you want to go?
Yeah, so 26 weeks is a stipulation by the President of the Family Division of the High Court, and it's not based on whether it's possible to do care proceedings in 26 weeks. The reason why a 26-week timetable was given was because at the time when Sir James Mumby stipulated that some care proceedings were taken over a year with no good reason, and it was largely local authorities to blame, so he wanted to drive some change in the system. More recently, what tends to hold things up is actually time in the family courts. West London Family Court is our local court, and they would acknowledge that they have limited available judges for hearings and struggle sometimes to schedule interim and final hearings in a timely way. So we monitor quite closely through our tracking whether we are at fault, and very occasionally we do have particularly large sibling groups that sometimes take longer than they should because of the work that we're trying to do. But these days it's more often court time, lack of court time.
So can I ask a question at that stage? Do we suffer a penalty as a county for not abiding by the even though it's not our fault?
Other than being publicly embarrassed by poor data, no. But the children in question suffer from not having a resolution to their situation within good timescales, and so we would always try and pursue getting it as close to 26 weeks as possible if we can.
In terms of the 27% figure, which was on line 20. Are you going back to that?
Thanks, Hayley. Yeah, thanks for pointing that one out. I will need to check that figure. It seems so out of kilter with what we provided previously, and there's also, because there's a calculation involved, I need to check how we arrived at that calculation. It seems, as I say, kind of an anomaly compared to the figures that we previously reported. That I will check that and come back to see if there's if that is indeed accurate. So there's again, I guess there's two reasons, I guess, that figures can be queried, I guess. One is if the information isn't recorded in the system, and the second one is how we sort of draw this information out. If we look at the at number 18, we can see that obviously kind of from April through to August, there's been an incredible kind of increase. Now, that suggests to me that there's something about how we've started to record this much more accurately. Now, whether or not that means that we've got arrived at a position where this is actually a true reflection of how many children participate in there is a different matter. But it seems to be kind of moving in that direction. In terms of the, I guess from an expectation or perhaps point of view, would always, where appropriate, try and involve a child in their reviews, obviously. It's not something that we have a target against. However, we do have the figures that we provided in the previous years, which were much higher than the 77%. So there is obviously something to kind of think about in terms of trying to get to that figure.
Thank you. And the questions I want to ask, I did raise with Rachel and Carl beforehand, and I'd like people's views on it. But looking at, and partly, I thought about it for a couple of times. We've looked at the performance management, but also it's come up a discussion, and certainly at number 11, when it comes up in amber, percentage of children that become subject to a child protection plan for the second or subsequent time. And I just don't find that a satisfactory way of looking at it, because if they need to be picked up, they've got to be picked up, and it shouldn't be to the detriment of the authority. It could be that they came off too early, or it's so serious they have to go back on. And we were talking about whether a better phrase would be within the range of, rather than the amber that makes you think, oh gosh, this isn't good enough. Okay, it's not. But the priority is the children, and it's better they're picked up if needed than not picked up. So I think it highlights it, to me, incorrectly, and I don't know how the rest of you feel. And there are a couple of others also looking at it with number 14. Is it 14? So it's not a target. But there's questions with a few of them. I don't know how people feel, whether, and it perhaps lands on your shoulders as well as Carl's, looking at some of these and seeing if a better phraseology would be within the range of, rather than the definite statement of amber, because I think they are fluid, and this makes it look too cut and dried. It's not saying we're not considering them, we're still looking them within a range, and I certainly feel passionately about number 11 not being a correct way of recording it, because the last thing I want is less children picked up if they need to be picked up. I don't know if anyone's got any views, or Rachel or Carl, you want to come? But if you had within a range, you'd get within a range of percentage, so you would still know. I just
feel the sort of language used in it is not the most appropriate to cater best for the position we are in and the position we want to keep in. It's just, I suppose I put children first, and I think it's too much of the hard cut labelling rather than looking at the fluid movement. And I just think so would No, I'm not saying labelling the child.
I work across many schools, colleges, the family court and family court magistrates and all these. And we use a lot of traffic light systems. And as long as we know where the numbers fit in, to me, I agree with Agatha, because you see, but just like if you're driving down the road, you don't expect a number to come up, you know that's the time to move, and it will last that much, that's length of time. So as long as we, as a panel members, have an idea of what the red comes from, and what the amber is, and what green is, I think, personally, I prefer the traffic lights.
Well, within the range, above the range, below the
Yes.
range, the interpreters are saying, I just think it's a more friendly way of presenting it. That's
Actually, Carl, Russell and I had a little bit of a debate about this before this meeting, because if you actually take line 11, so where the range, which is 12 to 20% and is amber, we were actually saying that 19%, making it amber was kind of like really it should be red because it's so close to being 20% and going to. That was just what we were talking about amongst ourselves, you know. And so it's, I think whichever way you go, then you because if you're within a range to be a colour, there's no one right or wrong way really.
I'll state really clearly my position on this, which is between 12 and 20% is the normal range, and this should be green. Between 12 and 20% is within the normal range, and this should be green. If you ask me, what am I going to do about this, because it's at 19%, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to do nothing. My service is operating as it should. Between 12 and 20% is absolutely normal for this level. It will fluctuate because there'll be different reasons for children coming back onto a plan or going off a plan, and that is fine. That is entirely normal. If I get above 20%, I should investigate the reasons why. There may still be good reasons, but I certainly need to find out. And if I get below 20%, there may equally be good reasons why, but I would be worried that I'm not picking up children that need to be picked up. So for me, inside the range is green, outside the range is red, and there's nothing in between. And that's how I'll manage my service accordingly.
Has anyone else got an opinion they want to contribute?
I have something, but it just, sorry, is it okay? Sorry. It's just a bit of explanation I need. With 39, it says agency social worker. It's a new, it's a quarterly new. Can you just explain that a little for me, please?
Sorry, I thought you were referring to what we were talking about.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Whether we have within range or...
Oh, sorry. I thought to think of that. Sorry.
Sorry, do you want...
So the new in brackets refers to the fact that it's a new measure for the scrutiny meeting, and the percentage of agency social workers gives you a figure of how many of our current workforces are agency as opposed to permanently employed. So it's a measure we report annually to the Department for Education.
Russell.
Taking account of what Rachel said about number 11 is basically, I think we ought to accept what she said and talk about that completely. I mean, originally that I talked about the fact that Amber was there because it was 90% of it was very near the town at the end, and that was a warning. But if the department don't do anything about it anyway, there's no point in having it in the mouth. I'll just go green and say, if you're over 20%, we are going to be concerned. If you're under 20%, we're not concerned.
Well, obviously we have a differing point of view, and that's fine. That's what we're here for at Scrutiny. We don't have to agree. It is to put forward. And I think obviously there is a difference in opinion whether we make a decision now, whether we want to change it or keep it as it is. So that would be the most democratic way. So is everyone happy if I do that?
Yeah.
Right, who is happy for it to be within the range?
As it is now.
No,
Who's happy for it to say within the range of?
Yeah, to use the phrase within the range.
Okay.
Who's happy to use that?
The normal range is 12
to 20,
So it's
rather
around,
than
yeah.
the colour. Who's
And
happy
that's
for
just,
that?
and that's just line 11.
We're talking about line
Yeah,
11 at the moment.
line 11, yeah.
Yeah.
The numbers tell us more.
Right, if we could, maybe the easiest way to start, we've got two choices, whether we change it to use within the range of, or we keep it as it is. So that's the two choices. So who would like to use, for number 11, within the range of? Can I see a show of hands of those committee members who are happy for that?
I'll produce data for this committee according to whatever the majority is, and I will run my service according to my view.
Right, so I am happy for it to be recorded.
Chair, I'm really sorry.
Sorry.
I'm really sorry, but I can't remember now what Rachel, as director, said she preferred, because that would be my preference if there's a particular way officers want to present it.
There's no
Within the range, I read outside.
Right.
It's
so within the range is what you're saying. I mean, it's obviously a very critical point.
So just to clarify the existing system, just to make sure that
If the figure is between 12 and 20%, it's green, because that is the normal range. If it's outside, either below 12 or above 20, then it's red, because that is outside the normal range.
So it would be removing the amber element. I just don't.
That's fine.
I'm
That's
not
fine.
happy with how
Fine.
it's
Yeah.
presented.
That's fine.
So it's just to clarify it, and you can agree or you don't have to agree.
Agreed.
Does everybody agree? Yeah, okay. Right. Could you put your hands up if you agree? Could you agree to red or green within the range?
Not using amber.
Not using amber. Right, can we just say that is unanimous? Thank you very much. And I think that is agreed, and it will be much clearer for us. And you are all free to question Rachel if you're not happy about something. Is this, Joan, relevant to this bit?
Yes, the only thing I asked, can it be a little bit larger, please?
We do usually have it printed off larger, and I agree with you, I have to get my glasses out. But it is the extra cost, and we try to save pennies as we can. We'll discuss that for you, Joan, and see. Thank you. Right.
I'm sorry, Chair. There is something that I must comment on because it's causing me so much concern, and I don't understand why I didn't pick up at the pre-meeting, so I apologise for that as well, which is that item number 39, the percentage of agency social workers, is categorically not correct at 50%. Categorically not correct. So I don't know what's gone wrong with that number, and I don't know why I didn't spot it earlier. We'll go away and we'll have that resolved. If it were true, it would mean a catastrophic reduction in the number of permanent social workers in this service, and I know that has not happened, so I need to get that corrected, not least because this is published information and it's something that Ofsted will look at. If they thought my number of permanent social workers had dropped by that amount, they would be in here next week. So I'm going to seek to have that corrected.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you. If we could move on. It's good when errors happen, it's good when they're picked up on. If we can move on to the work programme, item agenda 10, which is on page 34 for our next meeting. Within our pre-meet, we were discussing changes to the agenda. Have you printed on that?
Putting up some updated work programmes that reflect the changes that were made.
And this, the one that's being handed out, if you turn to the third page on it, where the fourth page, where it says we're looking at the date, the 6th of November, and if you look against your old one, what we were getting, support for failing schools, was out because there's a lot of work being done, and it was to bring in special education needs and disability strategy, what you were bringing up, Agatha. So we felt before that that was more important to bring in.
Yes, the support for failing schools has been moved to February.
Yeah, and that's now in February. Oh yeah, and the scrutiny review. The scrutiny review is on digital technologies coming in, and Russell, will you be bringing in that? Yeah, it's the update. And you'll bring the terms of reference for that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I thought that we'd all asked to see what support is happening for failing schools, and I feel pushing that through to January or February is quite a long time.
It's because of the work that's happening at the moment.
The reason why specifically, because the report needs to go to the school standards panel first, and because of when that sits, it comes here afterwards.
But it is to look at the work programme and ensuring it's meeting what we want to come up and what we see as perhaps a bit more pressing than the other. And then the support for schools to become a good one goes to the February one. Sorry, it's cross-referencing these papers. So it's still coming up, but there is ongoing work about it. Is everyone clear about that? Thank you.
Are we going to have the PFI updates?
I've written them in the minutes.
Yeah. Okay, right. Okay.
Thanks.
This is ready for November.
Yeah, it comes up the day after our meeting, doesn't it? So
yeah, that's a different one. That was the one which was happening anyway. When he was in Civic.
Yeah, I'll check this.
Right, is everyone clear about? And so if you keep this one with you, which is the update. Thank you for everyone for your input, and thank you Cabinet members for your questions.
Thank you.
Have a good evening and see you at the next meeting.